the golden anniversary and the silver platter. I am Tammy Hayes. I'm 34 years old, a senior paralegal living in the heart of Chicago, and for the last 15 years I have been the invisible glue holding a crumbling dynasty together. But tonight, in the grand ballroom of the Crystal Heights Resort, the glue finally dried up and snapped. The air in the ballroom smelled like expensive lilies and the underlying metallic scent of floor wax. I could hear the clinking of crystal glasses, $1.20 a stem, and the low, rhythmic hum of 200 guests who all thought they were witnessing a fairy tale. The center of it all were my parents, Arthur and Evelyn Hayes. They sat on velvet-backed chairs that looked like thrones, celebrating 50 years of what the program called unwavering love and family devotion. My sister, Melanie, sat to their right in a gown that cost more than my first car. My brother, Julian, was to their left, adjusting his silk tie and laughing at one of Dad's jokes. And me? I was standing near the kitchen swinging doors, wearing a black and white server's vest because Mom told me 3 days ago that the catering staff was short-handed, and it would be disrespectful to the family legacy if I didn't step in to ensure things ran perfectly. Tammy, table 7 needs more Sauvignon Blanc. Move it, dear, you're hovering, my mother hissed as she walked past me to greet a senator. She didn't look at my face. She looked at the tray in my hands. Her voice was like a frozen razor blade, sharp, cold, and thin. I walked to table 7. My heels were screaming. I had been on my feet for 6 hours, coordinating the florist, arguing with the chef about the steak tartare, and hand-polishing the silverware because the help wasn't doing it to Mom's standard of excellence. "Here you go, sir," I whispered, pouring the wine. "Thank you, miss," the guest said, not even glancing up. He thought I was hired help. Why wouldn't he? I wasn't in the family photos on the entryway montage. I wasn't listed in the sons and daughters section of the commemorative booklet. Climax of the humiliation came during the toasts. The room went dim and a spotlight hit my father. He stood up, looking every bit the dignified patriarch. He spoke for 10 minutes about Melanie's career in gallery curation. He spoke for 15 minutes about Julian's grit in taking over the family real estate firm. Then he cleared his throat. "And finally," Dad said, his voice booming through the speakers, "we must acknowledge the soul of this household. Every great machine needs a gear that turns without complaint. Every home needs someone to tend the hearth while the rest of us are out conquering the world. We want to thank our faithful helper Tammy for making tonight possible. Tammy, keep those appetizers moving, sweetheart. The guests are getting hungry." The room erupted in polite laughter. A faithful helper. Not a daughter. Not a woman with a law degree. Not the person who spent her weekends for the last decade driving him to his oncology appointments while Melanie was in Ibiza and Julian was in rehab, which we called spiritual retreats in public. I stood there, holding a tray of bacon-wrapped scallops, feeling the blood drain from my face. My heart wasn't racing, it was slowing down, turning into a heavy, cold stone in my chest. I looked at the head table. Melanie caught my eye and smirked, taking a slow sip of her champagne. Julian didn't even look. He was too busy checking his Rolex. The physical sensation of the betrayal was like a sudden drop in an elevator. My stomach churned, and for a second the smell of the lilies became nauseating, cloying and sweet like a funeral. I realized then that I wasn't at an anniversary. I was at the burial of my own identity. To understand how I ended up in a server's vest at my own parents' 50th anniversary, you have to understand the Hayes hierarchy. It's a ladder, and I was the dirt the ladder was planted in. Flashback to 16 years ago. I was 18, sitting at the scratched wooden kitchen table in our old house, the one before Dad struck it rich with the industrial zoning flip. I had just received my acceptance letter to Columbia. It was my dream. I worked 3 jobs in high school to pay the application fees because the family budget was tight. "We can't afford it, Tammy," Mom had said, not looking up from her crossword puzzle. Kitchen smelled like burnt toast and the cheap floral perfume she used back then. "Julian needs the tuition for the military academy. It'll build his character. You're so good with the house. Why don't you stay local? You can help me with your father's back treatments. But Mom, I got a partial scholarship, I had pleaded. My voice was trembling, my fingers clutching the thick envelope until the edges crumpled. Partial isn't full, she snapped, finally looking at me. Her eyes were like flat gray stones. Don't be selfish. Your brother is the future of this name. You're Tammy. You're our rock. Rocks don't move. So I stayed. I went to a local community college, then finished my degree online while working full-time as a legal secretary to pay for Julian's character-building academy, which he was kicked out of 6 months later for bringing a suitcase full of vodka onto campus. Did they make him pay the money back? No. They bought him a Porsche to boost his self-esteem after the trauma of the expulsion. I remember the night Julian got the car. The smell of new leather wafted through the driveway. Dad handed him the keys with a proud slap on the back. I need $400 for the insurance premium, Dad, I had mentioned that evening. I was trying to save for my LSAT prep courses. Ask your mother, Tammy. I'm tapped out from the down payment, he said, his eyes glued to the TV. When I asked Mom, she sighed as if I'd asked for a kidney. Tammy, really? Through all we do for you? You live here rent-free. I wasn't living there rent-free. I was the maid, the cook, the accountant, and the emotional punching bag. I spent my Saturdays scrubbing the grout in the guest bathroom with a toothbrush because Mom claimed the professional cleaners missed the corners. I spent my Sundays filing Dad's tax returns because he didn't trust those corporate crooks, but he trusted me, or rather, he trusted that I was too terrified of his disapproval to ever say no. The specific cruelty wasn't always a scream, it was the quiet erasure. Like the time Melanie won a local Young Artist Award. They threw a gala. I spent 3 weeks hand-sewing the silk drapes for the gallery display because the professionals were too expensive. On the night of the event, when the donor asked who did the incredible textile work, Melanie smiled and said, "Oh, I have a little workshop that handles my visions." I was standing 3 feet away, holding her coat. She didn't even use my name. The internal monologue in those years was a constant buzzing loop. If I just do more, they will see me. If I am perfect, they will love me. If I am indispensable, they will finally call me daughter with the same pride they use for Julian. But the high-definition reality of my life was far grimmer. It was the sound of Julian's drunken laughter at 3 a.m. while I cleaned his vomit off the foyer rug so Dad wouldn't see it and get a stress headache. It was the smell of the bleach that lived under my fingernails, a permanent reminder of the chores that occupied my free time. It was the sight of my bank account constantly hovering at near zero because every time I saved a few thousand, there was a family emergency, Dad's experimental knee surgery not covered by insurance or Melanie's mental health retreat in Sedona. I remember one specific Tuesday 4 years ago. I had just been promoted to senior paralegal. I came home with a bottle of sparkling cider. I couldn't afford real champagne to celebrate. Mom, Dad, I got the promotion, I announced, walking into the living room. They were looking at a brochure for a Mediterranean cruise. That's nice, Tammy, Dad said, not looking up. Listen, since you'll be making more, we were thinking you should take over the utility bills. It's only fair. And Melanie needs a new lens for her Leica. She's entering a competition. I stood there with my warm bottle of cider, the bubbles already going flat. My heart felt like it was being squeezed by a cold, greasy hand. I didn't say a word. I just went to the kitchen, put the cider in the back of the fridge, and started loading the dishwasher. Clatter of the plates was the only sound in the room, a sharp, rhythmic clink-clink-clink that felt like a countdown. I was 30 years old, and I was a ghost haunting my own life. I had no furniture of my own, no best friend who wasn't a work colleague, and a wardrobe consisting mostly of sensible black slacks and helper blouses. Tonight, at the 50th anniversary, as I watched my father toast to his faithful helper, I realized that the countdown was over. The bomb had finally gone off. But it wasn't going to destroy me. It was going to level the entire Hayes legacy to the ground. I reached into the pocket of my server's vest and felt the cold, hard plastic of a USB drive. I wasn't just the helper tonight. I was the projectionist. And I had a very special tribute video ready to play. The transition from the faithful helper speech to the cake cutting was a blur of high-definition agony. I had to stand there, 3 feet from the head table, holding a silver cake knife on a velvet cushion while the photographer barked orders. Family only in the shot. Tammy, step back, dear, you're catching the light, the photographer said, gesturing with a dismissive wave. I stepped back into the shadows of the heavy velvet curtains, my grip tightening on the cushion until my knuckles turned a ghostly white. I watched them. My mother leaned into my father, her $15,000 diamond necklace catching the strobe of the flashbulbs. She looked radiant, fueled by the ego of the room. Julian was already 3/4 drunk, leaning over to whisper something in a waitress's ear that made her flinch. Melanie was busy adjusting her pose, ensuring her good side was toward the social media influencers she'd invited to document the Hayes legacy. The smell of the cake, a 5-tier monstrosity of Madagascar vanilla and salted caramel, wafted toward me. To anyone else, it was the scent of luxury. To me, it smelled like the 3 weeks of sleep deprivation I'd endured while auditing the catering contracts to ensure Mom didn't overspend on her vision. I retreated to the hallway, my breath coming in jagged, shallow hitches. My internal monologue, usually a quiet drone of compliance, was screaming. They don't even see the person. They see an appliance. I am the dishwasher. I am the vacuum. I am the ATM. I pulled out my phone and looked at a scanned PDF in my private folder. It was a document I'd found 6 months ago while helping Dad organize his home office. It was a ledger, not the official one I used for his taxes, but a handwritten notebook tucked behind a false back in his mahogany desk. It was titled The Buffer Fund. As a paralegal, I knew how to read between the lines of financial jargon. The Buffer Fund wasn't a savings account. It was a record of every cent they had siphoned from the education trust my grandfather had set up for me. My grandfather, the only person who ever truly saw me, had left me $250,000 for law school and a start in life. The ledger showed the dates. June 2012, $40,000 moved to Julian's legal defense. That was the summer Julian crashed a jet ski into a pier while high on pills. August 2015, $60,000 moved to Melanie's European internship support. That was the year she lived in a loft in Paris pretending to paint while I was eating ramen and working 2 jobs. The specific, cruel detail that broke my soul was an entry from 2018. It was dated the week I was hospitalized with a severe kidney infection from overwork and stress. The entry read, $15,000 withdrawn from T's trust for anniversary cruise upgrades. T is stable, she wouldn't want us to miss this. They had literally stolen the money meant for my future to buy better pillows on a boat while I lay in a suburban hospital bed, alone, wondering how I was going to pay my deductible. The physical reaction was violent. I felt a surge of acid in my throat. My hand shook so hard I almost dropped the phone. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was a calculated financial assassination of my independence. The flashbacks hit me like physical blows as I leaned against the cold marble wall of the resort corridor. I remembered the winter of 2020. The world was shutting down, and the Hayes household had retreated to their country estate, a massive house in Lake Forest. "Tammy, you'll stay in the guest wing," my mother had said, her voice echoing in the empty, sterile foyer. "Since I'm working remotely, you can handle the cooking and the sanitizing. We can't risk the staff coming in and bringing the virus to your father." For 14 months, I was the only staff. I spent my days drafting legal motions for my firm and my nights scrubbing every doorknob with 70% isopropyl alcohol until my skin cracked and bled. I cooked 3-course meals for 4 people, 3 times a day. I remember the sound of the heavy iron gates clicking shut every time a delivery driver left. It was the sound of my life being locked away. Julian would spend his days playing video games at maximum volume, the thudding bass of his speakers vibrating through the floorboards of my small room. Julian, please, I have a deposition on Zoom, I'd beg, standing outside his door. Get a life, Tammy. You're just a paper pusher, he'd yell through the wood, never even pausing his game. The most vivid memory of that time was the family meeting they called in November. The room was warm, a fire roaring in the hearth, smelling of cedar and expensive brandy. Tammy, my father started, swirling his glass. We've decided to sell the downtown condo. It's the one you've been using as your home base. But Dad, that's where all my things are. That's my home, I said, my heart dropping. It's an asset, Tammy. And Melanie needs the capital to launch her digital gallery. It's for the family. You can just keep living here. We need the help anyway. Your mother's knees are playing up. I looked at Melanie. She was scrolling through a furniture catalog on her iPad, picking out mid-century modern pieces for a life she was building with my asset. She didn't even look up. She didn't thank me. She didn't acknowledge that I was being rendered homeless so she could have a studio. Where will I go when the world opens back up? I asked, my voice a small, pathetic whisper. You're always so dramatic, Mom sighed, adjusting her silk robe. You'll stay here. We're a family, Tammy. We stick together. Now, could you check on the roast? I think I smell it burning. I walked to the kitchen, the heat from the stove hitting my face, but I felt freezing. I stood over the roast, the fat sizzling and popping, stinging my skin. I realized then that they weren't sticking together. They were sticking to me. I was the host and they were the parasites. The financial documents I discovered later proved that the condo hadn't just been sold. It had been gifted to Melanie, who then took out a mortgage against it to fund her lifestyle. My name, which had been on the original deed as a successor, had been forged off the documents. I recognized my father's shaky, slanted handwriting on the signature line where mine should have been. The sound of the ballroom's applause snapped me back to the present. The tribute was about to begin. The faithful helper was expected to dim the lights and start the slideshow. I stood up straight, smoothed my server's vest, and wiped the moisture from my eyes. The shaking in my hands had stopped. It was replaced by a cold, buzzing clarity. They wanted a show? I was going to give them a premiere they would never forget. I walked toward the AV booth with the USB drive held like a scalpel. The last straw didn't happen in the ballroom. It happened 48 hours ago in the sterile, fluorescent-lit kitchen of my parents' Lake Forest estate. I was standing over a massive stainless steel bowl, hand-whisking an organic lemon curd because Mom insisted the store-bought version was pedestrian for the anniversary appetizers. My wrist was throbbing, a dull, rhythmic ache from carpal tunnel I developed while typing Julian's consulting reports for him. Julian stumbled into the kitchen, smelling of expensive gin and entitlement. He leaned against the marble island, watching me work with a smirk that made my skin crawl. Hey, helper, he chuckled, the word landing like a slap. Dad's changing the will again. Just thought you should know. He's putting the Lake Forest house in a trust for my future kids. To keep the Hayes name alive. I stopped whisking. The only sound was the hum of the $10,000 Sub-Zero refrigerator. The Lake Forest house? Julian, that was supposed to be my equity. Dad promised me that after the downtown condo went to Melanie. Julian let out a sharp, barking laugh. Promises are for people who matter, Tammy. You're the stay-at-home daughter. What do you need a whole estate for? You'll probably just end up living in the carriage house anyway, taking care of Mom until she's 100. It's your vocation, right? He reached over, dipped a dirty finger into my lemon curd, tasted it, and grimaced. Too tart. Fix it. As he walked out, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, I looked down at the lemon curd and realized I was holding the whisk so hard the metal wires were beginning to bend. The physical sensation was a strange, sudden silence in my head. It was the sound of a final door locking. I realized that as long as I played the faithful helper, I was voluntarily building my own cage. 10 minutes later, my mother walked in, clutching a seating chart like it was the Magna Carta. "Tammy, I've decided Julian's new girlfriend, the swimsuit model, needs to be at the head table. You'll be moved to the staff and logistics table near the kitchen. It's better for when you need to coordinate the wine service anyway." I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the fine lines of cruelty around her mouth, the way she didn't even see the human being standing in front of her, only a tool to be positioned. "Mom," I said, my voice eerily calm, "I'm your daughter, not the event coordinator." She paused, her eyes flickering with a momentary cold confusion before hardening. "Don't be tiresome, Tammy. You've always been so sturdy. You don't need the spotlight. Now finish the curd. The guests expect perfection." The sturdy daughter. The rock? In that moment, the rock turned into an avalanche. I realized that they didn't just overlook me, they actively despised the parts of me that weren't useful to them. I went to the bathroom, locked the door, and for the first time in my life, I didn't plan how to help them. I planned how to end them. As a senior paralegal, I have access to tools my family couldn't even dream of. They thought I was a paper pusher, but they forgot that paper pushers see everything. While they were busy choosing the font for the anniversary invitations, I was using my firm's forensic accounting software and my private investigator contacts to dig into the Hayes family holdings. The strategic twist came when I spent 14 hours straight in my small bedroom, surrounded by stacks of digitized bank statements and property deeds. I discovered the ghost clause. My father hadn't just forged my name on the condo sale. He had been using my social security number to open a series of high-interest bridge loans to cover Julian's mounting gambling debts and Melanie's failing gallery. They hadn't just stolen my inheritance. They had been systematically destroying my credit and saddling me with nearly $450,000 in undisclosed liabilities. I felt a cold sweat break out across my neck as I read the loan documents. The interest rates were predatory, and the signatures, bold, slanted, and utterly fraudulent, were all in my father's hand. He hadn't just sidelined me. He had set me up to be the fall guy when the Hayes house of cards eventually collapsed. The internal monologue was no longer a plea for love. It was a legal brief for a prosecution. Count 1, identity theft. Count 2, embezzlement of trust funds. Count 3, grand larceny. I didn't stop at the finances. I went into the family cloud account, the one I had set up and managed because neither of them knew how to reset a password. I found the deleted folder. In it were hundreds of emails between my parents and their lawyers, discussing how to structure the estate to ensure Tammy remains the primary caregiver without gaining any voting rights in the company. One email from my mother to my father stood out, dated just 2 months ago. "We have to keep her thinking the Lake Forest house is hers. If she leaves now, we'll have to hire a nurse and a housekeeper, and the expenses will eat into Julian's allowance. Just keep her useful until the anniversary. After that, we'll tell her about the loans." The smell of my own hot, angry breath filled the small room. I wasn't just a helper, I was a hostage. I spent the next 48 hours meticulously crafting the tribute video. On the surface, it looked like a standard slideshow of 50 years of marriage. But embedded in the metadata and hidden behind the transition fades, I prepared something much more potent. I contacted the bank's fraud department and the district attorney's office, but I didn't file the report yet. I wanted the public shame to precede the legal ruin. I gathered the recordings from the Lake Forest security cameras, the ones that caught Julian bragging about the stupid helper and my father laughing about bleeding the trust dry. I had the leverage. I had the proof. And as I sat in the AV booth of the Crystal Heights Resort, watching the faithful helper's speech end on the monitors, I felt a predatory sense of peace. My father thought he was giving a toast. I was about to give a testimony. I checked the USB drive one last time. It was labeled 50 Years of Hayes Truth. My thumb hovered over the play button. The ballroom was silent, waiting for the sentimental music to start. Instead, they were about to get the sound of their own lives crashing down. The lights in the ballroom dimmed to a soft, expectant lilac. A hush fell over the 200 guests, their faces illuminated by the flickering glow of the massive 40-foot LED screen behind the head table. My father sat back, adjusting his tuxedo jacket with a smug, self-satisfied grin, patting my mother's hand. They were expecting a montage of soft-focus photos set to unforgettable. I pressed play. The music didn't start with Nat King Cole. It started with a low, distorted mechanical hum. The first image wasn't my parents' wedding day. It was a high-definition scan of my grandfather's handwritten will, specifically the section highlighting the $250,000 trust fund for Tammy Hayes. Red digital ink circled the amount. Confused murmur rippled through the room. My father leaned forward, his squinting eyes darting to the AV booth where I stood in the shadows. Then the audio kicked in. It wasn't music. It was the crystal-clear recording from the Lake Forest kitchen 2 months ago. My mother's voice rang through the professional-grade sound system, amplified to every corner of the hall. "We have to keep her thinking the Lake Forest house is hers. If she leaves now, we'll have to hire a nurse and a housekeeper, keep her useful until the anniversary." The room went deathly silent. My mother's face transformed from a mask of regal elegance to a pale, twitching mess of horror. She dropped her champagne flute. The glass shattered against the marble floor with a sound like a gunshot. The screen flickered. Next came the bridge loan documents. I had animated the signatures. My father's forged Tammy Hayes signature slid over my actual signature from my passport, showing the glaring criminal discrepancy. Large bold text appeared over the screen. Identity theft total, $450,000. "Turn it off," my father roared, standing up so fast his chair toppled backward. "Tammy, shut it down right now." I didn't move. I had locked the AV booth from the inside. The video transitioned to security footage from the library. There was Julian, slumped on the leather sofa, laughing as he tossed a stack of my legal textbooks into the fireplace to start a blaze. "The helper thinks she's going to be a lawyer," he sneered on camera, his voice slurred. "She doesn't realize she's just our retirement plan." The guests, business partners, socialites, judges were frozen. Some were whispering behind their hands. Others looked at my parents with pure, unadulterated disgust. The Hayes legacy was dissolving in real time, replaced by the digital evidence of a decade of domestic abuse and financial fraud. The final slide wasn't a photo. It was a screenshot of the email I had sent to the district attorney and the fraud departments of 3 major banks exactly 5 minutes ago. The timestamp was visible, 9:15 p.m. The screen went black. The house lights slammed on. I walked out of the AV booth, still wearing that ridiculous server's vest. I walked straight to the head table. My father's face was a dangerous shade of purple, his veins bulging against his silk collar. "You ungrateful, pathetic little," he started, his hand raised as if to strike me. "Careful, Dad," I said, my voice cold and steady, amplified by the lapel mic I was still wearing. "The police are already in the lobby." I called them to report the identity theft and the embezzlement before I started the video. "If you touch me, we'll just add assault to the list of charges." He froze. Power he had held over me for 34 years vanished in the space of a heartbeat. He looked small. He looked old. He looked like a criminal. Melanie was sobbing, her head in her hands, realizing her gallery was funded by stolen money that was about to be clawed back. Julian was trying to slip out the side door, but 2 resort security guards, whom I had tipped off about his unauthorized substances, were already blocking his path. I took the silver cake knife from the table, cut myself a massive slice of the Madagascar vanilla cake, and took a slow, deliberate bite. It was delicious. "Happy anniversary," I whispered to my mother. The faithful helper just quit. I walked out of the Crystal Heights resort that night with nothing but my purse and the clothes on my back. I didn't go back to the Lake Forest estate. I didn't answer the 142 frantic calls from my siblings or the venomous texts from my mother. The fallout was nuclear. Within 72 hours, my father was brought in for questioning regarding the forged loan documents. Because I am a senior paralegal, I had prepared the evidence binder with such surgical precision that the prosecutors didn't even need to do their own discovery. The bridge loans were called in immediately. To avoid immediate jail time, my parents had to liquidate the Lake Forest estate and the downtown condo Melanie thought was hers. They moved into a 2-bedroom rental in a part of town they used to mock. Julian is currently in a court-mandated rehab program, and Melanie is working at a retail clothing store, a job she considers below her dignity, which makes it all the more poetic. As for me, the $450,000 in debt was cleared once the fraud was proven. I filed a civil suit to recover my grandfather's trust fund, and while most of it was gone, I secured a settlement that allowed me to finally open my own small legal advocacy firm. The physical change was the most startling. The tension that had lived in my shoulders for 2 decades simply evaporated. The smell of bleach no longer lingers under my fingernails. My internal monologue is no longer a checklist of how to please monsters. It's a quiet, peaceful narrative of my own making. 3 months after the anniversary, I sat in a small, sun-drenched bistro in Chicago with my chosen family, the 2 colleagues from my firm who had sat with me in the hospital when my parents were on their cruise, and a woman named Sarah I'd met in a support group for survivors of narcissistic abuse. The smell of fresh coffee and rain-washed pavement filled the air. There was no velvet, no crystal, and no standard of excellence to uphold. "To Tammy," Sarah said, raising a simple ceramic mug, "who stopped being a rock and decided to be the whole mountain." I felt a tear prick my eye, but it wasn't a tear of pain. It was the feeling of finally being seen. I am Tammy Hayes. I am a daughter of no one, a sister to no one, and a servant to nothing. For the first time in 34 years, I am finally breathtakingly alone, and I have never been more at home.